class. You're two of the earliest students to come to our DS seminar in WLA. Nicole was wearing her faded big ass, her faded big pink backpack, which last year sadly fell apart, but when she had it, it was able to hold over 15 books and her entire little toolbox of map making stuff. Along with that, she was wearing this amazing black cap and a beautiful smile, and I knew immediately that me and Nicole were going to be friends. This was also, if we're going to paint the picture, this is when Nicole had a little bit shorter hair. It wasn't as short as the end of freshman year. That's when we tried to dye it in a communal Benjamin Franklin bathroom, and it did not work out. But yeah, from the very first moment, I knew that me and Nicole were going to be such amazing friends, both because of her kindness, but also just because of her amazing caring for all the people in this room. And yeah, Nicole was just someone from the beginning that I knew I could trust. It's no coincidence that when me, Anna, Finn, and Alina were first entering into that classroom, we all chose to sit down next to Nicole. And by the second week of classes, me and Alina and Nicole were in a room in Lower Bass, drawing out mini histories of our family homes on one of the big whiteboards. Me of my hometown from Connecticut, you, Nicole, of your suburban home in San Jose, and Alina of your village in Pakistan. And yeah, we were always a group. We stuck through thick and thin, and we were all DS trauma survivors, I cannot lie. But we made it through together, both through shared notes docs and through just a lot of self-support. Yeah, and it wasn't just us as classmates who were in love with Nicole. Professors too apparently love Nicole. So after delivering her presentation in our very first philosophy class, our divinity school professor announced, and I quote, his admiration for Nicole by calling her the very true philosopher of our class. Even years later, I continue to witness this amazing passion and drive that Nicole has for learning and just exploring new things, whether it's making a bunch of maps for the numerous map classes that she's taken over the year, not just one, she's taken more than one map class, or if it's doing the many other things like studying for sharks. She took a shark class, she's studying shark anatomy. Nicole always dedicates herself to what matters. And though she's no longer in any of the classes I take, I still count Nicole amongst one of my closest friends. She's the type of person who gets up early in the morning at a ripe 6 a.m., does a bunch of stuff, cooks a bunch of soup, takes a run, and then locks in on her thesis in STAR. And I'm just so thankful that I have a friend who not only is someone I can have so much fun with, but is also someone who is super reliable and someone I can support on. And yeah, amongst our friend group, Nicole is known by many nicknames. She's known by Scooter and also Sleeping Beauty because she used to have a habit of scootering around campus and falling asleep during lectures. She's also known to her family as the funny, sometimes angry child, so there's a bunch of pictures from Nicole when she was really young showing her with temper tantrums. And yeah, just to put it bluntly, Nicole is awesome in every way. And we all here know, but I and everyone else, Nicole, are so proud of you. You're one of the most active, hardworking, and caring people that we know on this campus. You're not only doing this history senior thesis, you're also doing a CS senior thesis, which is enough as it is. But you also do that while making your own meals, looking after your friends, publishing numerous papers and articles, doing little graphic design things, and just living your life. And honestly, Nicole, I'm so thankful that I met you because you make me, all of our friends, and everyone in this room proud every day. So thank you so much, Nicole.
Thanks for the lovely introduction. I'm Nicole, and I'm presenting on my senior thesis, Post-News Domestic Workers and Venereal Disease in 1930s Newark, and my advisor is Dr. Brennan Shanahan. Housing and public health in Newark. So specifically, I'm interested in how the public health department is mapping these racial assumptions onto lived spaces and onto the people who inhabit them. So this is a quote from the health officer, Charles V. Craster. He'll appear multiple times throughout this presentation because he essentially runs the Newark Health Department, and the urban renewal projects are actually under the health department. So he says that these dwellings are blot upon our modern ideas of fair living conditions for our workers. So here he's also drawing a distinction between two distinct labor pools of, on one hand, we have our desirable workers, and on the other hand, all the residents of this specific area are labeled as like non-productive or labeled as morally incorrect. So demolition and modifications of urban form certainly doubles as a form of social engineering and social cleansing. And to further elaborate upon that link between urban renewal and epidemic, so now I'll go into essentially two main methods that the health department uses to monitor for disease. So first section on managing infectious disease, and then some more specifics on the anti-syphilis campaign. So healthcare as a social responsibility. In the late 19th century, Newark basically focuses on creating new sanitary systems, these very large-scale modifications, but then this shifts to personal responsibility in the 20th century. So if you're unhealthy, if you have a diseased body, that means there is some intellectual deficit, as displayed in this 1929 Health Department annual report. And hence healthcare becomes a social responsibility that is a private burden rather than a municipal responsibility. And this gets really dangerous, especially when considering the policies that are taking place as part of this anti-syphilis campaign in the 1930s. I think it's important to observe that syphilis, compared to tuberculosis or typhoid or these various other contagious diseases, by nature of its transmission also necessarily carries with it this moral stigma. So essentially linking an individual's biological form to social perceptions, discursive perceptions of of their moral conduct and their intimate conduct. So this is a graphic of the Wasserman blood tests, which were essentially the doctor here is pricking the patient's right earlobe to collect drops of blood for testing in a national laboratory. So this is also this was only 1/5 of the required health examination, so it's definitely a non-trivial process. And the health department specifically translates assumptions about majority Black domestic workers into policies that police their physical bodies, and through policing of physical bodies also tries to regulate for these social sexual norms. So finally getting into the Newark Ordinance. First, I want to consider what is the nature of domestic labor and what is the nature of intimate labor. So in the late 19th century, there emerges this domestic science movement. So this is saying that there's the household can be managed in the same way as a workplace. So in an effort to professionalize domestic work, there's a lot of progressive reformers at this time are developing this theory of scientific housekeeping. So if you keep your house clean, if you keep your sheets clean, then you will raise healthy children, and through that method contribute to the fabric of the nation. Labor historian Eileen Boris, she comes up with this framework of intimate labors. So thinking about how different professions can commodify intimacy. And this is very clearly seen in multiple forms of domestic labor where you might be a caretaker for a chronically ill patient, or wet nursing, or cleaning someone's sheets, washing the windows. These are not only physical exchanges, but there's an assumption that emotional intimacy and love is also made to be commodified and to be a transaction through the hiring of domestic labor. So finally we get to the 1930 ordinance. So the text of the ordinance originally states that no person shall work as a domestic servant unless they've filed formally with the health department and they've obtained a card with their photograph on it. And employers need to check all these cards because the health department actually goes to every single employment agency and meets with them and tells them you need to enforce these qualifications. In 1933, this expands to not only do you need to get a general health examination, but every single domestic worker needs to also be tested for syphilis, despite a statistical inconsistency. So in a 1937 newspaper article, Wasserman says, Craster says that there's a 17% infection rate among domestic workers. But in a separate 1932 bulletin, only under 1% of domestic workers who are examined actually tested positive for syphilis. So using the language, the state really uses the language of public health to broker these labor relations and also enforce spatial bounds, because if you have to go to the effort of obtaining a card twice a year just to step in the door and be employed, that places some real restrictions on transient labor and migratory labor. I just wanted to close with this quote from Saidiya Hartman's Wayward Lives, Beautiful Experiments, and think a bit about just dwelling on the practice of historical inquiry, because I think it's important to recognize the impossibility of reconciling these broader historical theories to everyday pragmatism, as Samantha mentioned in her presentation. So I first became interested in this topic of the New Work Ordinance, sort of through a complicated route, but essentially in 1930, the New York Health Department issues an ordinance that requires all domestic workers to pass biannual health exams if they want to be employed. And then in 1933, this ordinance is further expanded to specifically require all domestic workers to be tested for syphilis through blood tests. So I'm curious about how this burden of public health regulation, which is traditionally thought of as a municipal responsibility, filters down to the individual level, and specifically filters down in a way that distributes responsibility across residents in this targeted manner. So yeah, this is the general outline of the three main sections of my thesis. And so I'm trying to explore this idea of, by making essential workers suspect workers, city officials, and specifically the Newark Health Department and Sanitation Department, are reserving protection, physical protection, for those who can afford to outsource these intimate labors like house cleaning, caring for children, while also making these domestic workers, placing them on the front lines of this battle against contagious diseases. So to start off, understanding the location and the setting of 1930s Newark. So specifically, I'm interested in this question of urban form and modifications to the urban form. So for the specific neighborhood that my thesis focuses on is the 3rd Ward, or the Central Ward of Newark. So this is essentially where the current Performing Arts Center is, where the Newark Public Library is, and it's right along the Passaic River, and it's also one of the oldest, in the 1930s, it's one of the oldest parts of the city. So prior to the Great Migration, there's, the demographic is primarily Eastern European immigrants, so like you can see, there's Hebrew on this shopfront sign, so there's a lot of Jewish immigrants, Russian immigrants, and German immigrants. And following the Great Migration, the 1930 census shows that over 50% of the 3rd Ward population is Black residents, and compared to, so there's 16 wards in Newark, and compared to every other ward, the 3rd Ward has the highest concentration of Black residents. So in the late 1930s, there's a series of slum demolition and housing projects. So this is an image from the Branch Brook Housing Project. It's an urban renewal project where the city comes in and clears, demolishes a lot of these old buildings. And if you look into the actual city documents, they frame this demolition as also a social engineering project. Like, it explicitly states that one of the goals of this urban renewal is to spatially sterilize the 3rd Ward, or the Central Ward. So this is, I wanted to show this as an example of how quickly urban form can change. So this is an advertisement in August of 1937. It's for the Great Eastern Supermarket, which sits at the intersection, find family trees, and really discover who a person is. And oftentimes that's not possible by archival restrictions. And I think it's important to remember that the lens through which historians evaluate theories really often excludes this urgent calculus of everyday life of, I need to take the bus at this time. I need to go home and cook after a long day. Maybe I'll go to the park and talk to my neighbors. And I think that in the absence of having this material ability to listen to, track all these bodies in motion and listen to the variations in the songs, it's still imperative to imagine it and to imagine the spontaneity and mobility and the freedom to, be selfish or enjoy leisure. And I think that's one of my favorite parts of history. This has been really rewarding. Thank you for listening. Oh, wait, sorry. Yes.
Yeah, I was just wondering, sort of, at the time that these regulations were made, like in 1930, in like the Newark public imagination and consciousness, were there any like scary stories, like fear-mongering being circulated? Because I'm thinking, for example, the story of like Typhoid Mary and how that became such a scary story in the public imagination of that place at that time. And I was wondering if there was fear-mongering like that could have been partly responsible for like regulations like this popping up.
Yeah, that's a really good question. Actually, like Craster in the same report, he like specifically mentions Typhoid Mary and this idea of like there's dangerous women who are spreading contagious diseases.